Imagine carrying groceries to your own front door and being dragged away in handcuffs before the eggs even hit the ground. That's what happened to Camille Vaughn. Neighbors shouted she lived there. Proof blinked on the door's digital log. Yet officers laughed, mocked, and filmed her humiliation in the pouring rain. They thought she was powerless. They thought she would break in silent. But what none of them knew was that Camille wasn't just another woman on the street. She was the FBI's most dangerous agent, and the moment she made one phone call, the ground beneath those officers began to crumble. Stay with me, because the truth behind what happened next will leave you breathless. Camille Vaughn had carried groceries up those cracked stone steps 100 times before, but never like this. The paper bags split open in the rain, apples rolling toward the gutter, milk spilling in a white stream across the concrete. She bent to gather them, her fingers trembling more from disbelief than cold, and looked up into the hard eyes of Sergeant Mason Kerr. His voice had landed on her like a blade a moment earlier, 4 words that stripped her of every ounce of belonging. "You don't belong here." He didn't whisper. He didn't check. He announced it, loud enough for the neighbors under their umbrellas to hear, loud enough to sting deeper than the rain. A hush swept through the courtyard. A child's voice asked a question, quickly shushed by his mother. Phones lifted into the air like silent accusers. Rain hammered harder on the awning above the entrance, drumming in rhythm with Camille's pulse. She did not shout back. She didn't plead. She let her eyes travel, deliberate and calm, to the small red light blinking above the building's door. The CCTV camera that watched without prejudice. She knew what it was capturing: spilled food, her wrists forced behind her, and a sergeant's smirk dripping with power. The cuffs clicked cold around her skin. Officer Tyler Nash, barely past boyhood, held up his iPhone with a crooked grin. "This'll look good in the group chat," he muttered, not even bothering to lower his voice. He angled the shot to frame her fallen groceries with her restrained hands, like evidence in some twisted performance. His laughter blended with the rain, cruel and careless. Camille's face remained composed, but her silence cut sharper than any protest could. From across the courtyard, Miss Agnes Carter shuffled forward, her cane tapping against the soaked stone. 76 years old, bent by time but not broken. Her voice cracked but carried. "She lives here, apartment 8B. I've seen her for years." Kerr didn't even turn his head. "Ma'am, step back," he ordered, his tone sharpened with sarcasm. "For your safety." His badge gleamed wet under the yellow security light, a shield and a weapon all at once. Daniel Foster, the building's porter, stumbled closer, jacket soaked through, keys jangling in his nervous grip. His voice was steadier. "She's a resident. I signed her in myself. 8B. Top floor. The system recorded it." He gestured toward the panel at the entrance, where a faint green light blinked with quiet certainty. "Proof. Evidence." It glowed there, humming silently against the storm. Kerr smirked wider, stepping into Camille's space, so close the rain from his jacket sprayed her cheek. "Logs can be faked, cards can be stolen. Show me your ID, if you have one." His voice rose, taunting her silence, daring her to break it. Camille did not. Her wrists shifted once inside the metal, bones grinding under the pressure, but her lips stayed pressed shut. Silence unnerved them. Silence carried weight. Silence, tonight, was her weapon. Captain Howard Kemp emerged from behind the squad car, his belly straining against his belt, his laugh coarse and smoky. "You think a green light proves she belongs here?" His chuckle cut into the heavy air. "People lie. Machines glitch. Nothing proves anything." His voice carried to the crowd, feeding doubt, feeding fear. A man whispered, "Maybe they're right." Another countered, "No, that light doesn't lie." Whispers turned to murmurs, the courtyard dividing itself between those who believed what they saw and those too afraid to question the men in uniform. Tyler Nash tilted his phone toward Mrs. Carter, sneering, "Careful, Grandma. Don't want to end up viral yourself." His laughter was sharp, cruel, meant to humiliate not just Camille, but anyone who dared defend her. Miss Carter lifted her chin, her cane stamping once, louder than her frail frame should allow. You can't treat her this way, not here, not in front of us all. Her words cracked but didn't falter. The crowd wavered, umbrellas shifting, eyes darting between authority and conscience. Camille finally moved, just her head, just her gaze. She looked at Mrs. Carter, then at Daniel Foster, then at the unblinking red light above the door. Each look lingered, long enough to feel like instruction. Hold this moment. Remember, every insult, every sneer, every false word, they would be recorded, stored, used. She did not need to speak. She only needed to endure. The squad car door groaned open. Kerr shoved her forward, his breath sour with disdain. Standard procedure, he muttered, deliberately loud, for the neighbors huddled in the rain to hear. We've seen this before. He wanted the words to stain her reputation, to turn the crowd against her. But the silence that followed wasn't agreement. It was hesitation, doubt, the kind that spread like cracks in stone. Camille was guided roughly toward the car, her shoes sliding against the wet pavement, her wrists throbbing in steel. The groceries lay behind her, ruined, cereal bleeding into puddles, eggs cracked open like casualties of humiliation. But she never looked back. Her eyes stayed fixed forward, rain dripping from her lashes, her body held upright despite the weight pressing her down. She knew the camera was watching. She knew silence was stronger than shouting. She knew the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm building inside those who dared to witness. The door slammed shut, echoing against the courtyard walls. For the neighbors, the show seemed over. For Camille Vaughn, it was just beginning. The squad car rattled against the flooded streets, each bump jarring Camille Vaughn's wrists deeper into the cuffs. The rain beat on the roof like an angry drum, but inside the car it was the silence that hurt more. Sergeant Mason Kerr sat in the driver's seat, shoulders squared, face fixed in smug certainty. Beside him, Captain Howard Kemp wheezed a chuckle as he lit a cigarette, the smoke curling through the damp air, mixing with the stench of wet uniforms. In the front passenger seat, Officer Tyler Nash angled his phone just enough to catch Camille's reflection in the glass. Still quiet, he said, his grin sharp, arrogant. Silence always means guilt. He whispered as if narrating for an invisible audience. She thinks she's above us, he chuckled, convinced he had power over her. But Camille didn't flinch. She held her posture as if she had all the time in the world. She had learned long ago that silence, properly wielded, was more dangerous than shouting. The car jolted to a stop outside the precinct, headlights reflecting off slick pavement. Kerr yanked the door open and dragged her out roughly, water soaking her skirt and shoes, the cuffs grinding against bone. She kept her balance, eyes lifted toward the buzzing fluorescent lights above the entrance. Neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by whispers from the courtyard. Some had followed on foot, umbrellas clutched tight, faces pale but watchful. Their presence mattered. Witnesses were more powerful than uniforms imagined. Camille's gaze flicked toward them, and though she said nothing, it was enough. They would not forget. Inside, the precinct was no shelter. The air smelled of bleach and stale coffee. Her shoes left wet prints across the linoleum as she was marched down the corridor to a room with peeling paint and a single chair. Kerr shoved her inside, voice sharp. Sit. The metal chair groaned under her weight, her wrists chained to the table, her posture still straight. Captain Kemp leaned in the doorway, smoke leaking from his lips, his laughter hollow but loud. Trespassing, loitering, suspicion of drugs, plenty of reasons to keep you here overnight. His words landed like nails, meant to humiliate, not to convince. Camille's voice entered the air for the first time since the courtyard. Calm, even. Phone call, just 2 words. Kerr sneered. One call won't save you. She repeated firmer. Phone call. It was not a plea. It was a right, and she said it like a demand, like procedure recited from memory. Tyler Nash laughed from the corner. His phone raised again, recording every detail. Who do you want, huh? Mommy? Boyfriend? Maybe that doorman who thinks you're some saint? His mockery drew another chuckle from Kemp, smoke rasping in his lungs. But Camille's eyes didn't waver. She fixed them on Kerr. Supervisor, the word dropped like a stone into the room. For the first time, the officers exchanged glances. Nash lowered his phone slightly. The arrogance in his grin flickered. Kerr scoffed but shoved a desk phone across the table, uncuffing one wrist. Fine. Embarrass yourself. Her fingers dialed without hesitation. The line clicked, rang once. Director Samuel Trent, she said, her voice steady, measured. This is Agent Camille Vaughn, badge number 5217. I'm in custody at the downtown precinct. Immediate response required. Silence followed, thick, suffocating. Then the reply came, low and commanding, carrying weight like iron. Copy that, Agent Vaughn. Hold position. Units are en route. The room froze. Kemp's cigarette slipped ash onto the floor. Tyler Nash blinked, phone forgotten in his hand. Kerr's jaw clenched, his chest rising and falling heavier now. The air in the room shifted, the balance tilting. For the first time, it wasn't Camille who looked cornered. It was them. She replaced the receiver slowly, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She folded her hands on the table, cuffs dangling from one wrist like an afterthought. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence was sharper than their threats. Outside, the low rumble of engines grew louder, steady, deliberate, like thunder rolling closer. Kerr tried to mask the panic with anger, slamming the empty file on the table. You think that call means anything? It doesn't. Silence doesn't protect you. It makes you easy. But his voice betrayed him. It cracked just enough for Camille to hear the fear beneath. She sat straighter, unbroken, and let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Nash shifted uneasily, his phone trembling in his hand. Kemp cleared his throat too loudly, the laugh gone from his chest. Camille's breathing stayed even, calm. The storm outside roared closer, its rhythm pounding against the walls, each beat a promise. She knew what was coming. She had built toward it piece by piece, the blinking CCTV light, the green log at the door, the neighbor's testimony, every insult recorded on Nash's phone. They had thought her silence weakness. They would learn it was the sharpest weapon she owned. The engines stopped outside. Doors slammed in unison. Boots struck pavement with military rhythm. The sound carried through the walls, through the corridors, into the room where three men suddenly found themselves the ones under judgment. Camille lowered her eyes briefly, almost in prayer. Then she lifted them again, steady, unflinching, as the door at the end of the hall swung open. The storm had finally arrived. The echo of boots striking wet pavement carried through the precinct corridors, a sound that neither Sergeant Mason Kerr nor Captain Howard Kemp could disguise with their hollow bravado. The rain had slowed to a mist outside, but inside the tension thickened with every approaching step. Camille Vaughn sat perfectly still at the metal table, her cuffs dangling from one wrist, her posture unbent, her gaze steady. The men who only minutes earlier laughed at her silence now shifted in unease. Officer Tyler Nash tucked his phone halfway into his pocket, hands trembling, though the red light of its recording still glowed faintly. The storm outside had arrived, but the storm within the precinct was only beginning. The door burst open, with deliberate force, swinging wide on rusted hinges. Director Samuel Trent stepped inside, tall, bald trench coat dripping with rain. His eyes were not curious, they were certain, cutting straight to Camille. Agent Vaughn, he said, and the title carried more weight than any badge Kerr had ever worn. Camille rose slowly, not hurried, adjusting her sleeve where the steel cuff had bruised her wrist. Director, the single word was not a greeting, not a request, but a confirmation. Her identity was no longer a question. It was truth spoken aloud. Behind Trent, two federal agents moved swiftly, their cases already open, wires trailing from devices ready to seize every phone, every hard drive, every recording the precinct held. The balance shifted in an instant. Kerr straightened his chest as if puffed air could make him taller. Director, this is a misunderstanding. She was trespassing, suspicious behavior, standard protocol. His words came out too fast, too loud, and for the first time lacked conviction. Trent didn't look at him. He gestured to the agents, who reached for Nash's phone and sealed it into a bag marked as evidence. Nash's face blanched, as if his lifeline had been ripped from him. Captain Kemp flicked his cigarette to the floor, grinding it under his boot. His earlier laugh shrunk to silence. The crowd outside had grown, pressing against the glass partition, reporters jostling with neighbors who had followed. Flashes of cameras burst against the rain-smeared windows, their questions muffled but urgent. Inside, Trent laid a folder on the table, pulling out still frames from the condo's CCTV. Each picture clear as daylight: Camille in cuffs, groceries spilled, Kerr sneering, Nash recording. The truth, preserved in machine memory, could not be drowned by sarcasm. Kemp tried again, voice rough. Logs can be faked, cards can be stolen. Anyone could have swiped in.
Hey.
Trent let him finish, let the desperation sit in the air before opening another folder. This time, the digital log entry glowed in printed ink. Camille Vaughn, 8:42 p.m. Apartment 8B, exact, time-stamped, undeniable. You claimed she was trespassing, Trent said, voice even. This log proves otherwise, Mason Kerr snapped back. She could have hacked it. The absurdity landed heavy. A murmur rose from the crowd behind the glass. Someone scoffed. Another muttered, "They're reaching." Mrs. Agnes Carter tapped her cane once, sharp against the tile. "The door doesn't lie. She belongs here." Her voice trembled but carried across the lobby, striking with more force than Kerr's shouting ever could. Daniel Foster stepped forward, holding up the sign-in keys, his voice quivering but firm. "I signed her in. I keep the records. I saw her tonight." Two ordinary voices, an elderly neighbor and a weary porter, now stood like pillars in the room, their presence unshaken. Camille turned slightly, her eyes meeting theirs for just a moment, silent gratitude, expressed in a glance. Then she spoke, calm, cutting through the noise. "Badge numbers, record them." The words weren't for Kerr or Kemp, they were for the witnesses, the crowd, the cameras, phones tilted up from behind the glass, lenses trained on gleaming badges, on faces that only moments ago had mocked. The humiliation that had been staged for Camille was folding back onto the officers themselves. Nash stepped backward, his lips tightening as if silence could save him now. Kemp shook his head, muttering under his breath, "This is blown out of proportion." But the whispers from the crowd grew louder, no longer whispers but voices rising. "She lives here. We saw it. They're lying." Trent lifted a hand and one of the agents connected Nash's phone to a monitor. The screen lit up with video. Nash's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "Smile for the camera, meme of the week." Rodriguez's laughter harsh, coarse spilled through the speakers, and Kerr's voice sneered, "Standard procedure." The evidence was no longer silent. It mocked them with their own cruelty, captured by their arrogance. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Flashes popped again from cameras, and the weight of exposure pressed on the three men in uniform. Their weapons were no longer authority and fear. Their words had become their undoing. Camille sat again, her presence unbroken, her silence heavy. For weeks, for years, she had endured words like, "You don't belong here." Tonight, the words belonged not to her accusers, but to evidence, to cameras, to a public unwilling to forget. Trent closed the folder, his voice steel. "You detained a federal agent without cause, on record, on camera, under threat. Explain yourselves." Kerr opened his mouth but no words came. His face flushed red, then pale. Kemp's jaw worked but stayed shut. Nash's phone screen glowed in the evidence bag, mocking his trembling hands. Camille looked toward the glass wall, toward the crowd pressing closer. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply waited, her silence still the sharpest weapon in the room. As the sound of the storm outside faded into the steady thrum of justice arriving, the precinct had turned into a theater, every hallway a stage, every light an unforgiving spotlight. Camille Vaughn sat in the center of it all, her silence pulling more weight than the shouting of three men who now looked smaller in their own uniforms. The video had ended, its cruel laughter echoing in the crowd's ears, and yet the impact hung in the air like a lingering bruise. Director Samuel Trent did not need to raise his voice. The evidence had already spoken. Kerr shifted his boots nervously, his once rigid shoulders now sagging under a truth he could no longer spin. Captain Howard Kemp avoided everyone's eyes, his broad chest rising and falling like a man trying not to drown. Tyler Nash, the phone still sealed in a bag, rubbed his trembling fingers against his thigh, as though he could erase what had been captured. Outside the glass partition, the crowd pressed tighter. Reporters shouted questions. Neighbors lifted their phones higher and flashes burst like lightning, catching sweat glistening on the officers' brows. Mrs. Agnes Carter's face shone proud though streaked with rain, her cane tapping once more against the tile like a judge's gavel. Daniel Foster stood beside her, lips set in a thin line of resolve, his hands clenched around his keys, as if anchoring himself to the truth he had dared to speak. The noise built, chants beginning low but rising. Let her go, until the words rolled together into a wave too loud to ignore. Trent gestured, and the federal agents opened another folder. Screenshots appeared on the monitor, pulled from seized devices within minutes of arrival. Group chats scrolled across the screen, messages dripping with contempt. Kerr boasting about cleaning the neighborhood, Nash posting blurry photos of cuffed women, his captions laced with mockery, Kemp applauding with emojis, his laughter immortalized in crude shorthand. Each line of text was another wound, not only to Camille but to every resident who had lived under the shadow of these uniforms. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Reporters pressed microphones against the glass. "How many officers?" one shouted. "Is this systemic?" Another cried. The montage continued, names rolling down like a ledger of arrogance. 12 officers implicated, 12 accounts dripping with cruelty turned into ritual. The chants grew louder, joined by anger now. Not just disbelief, neighbors who had been silent in the rain spoke boldly here. "We saw it. We told you. This is proof." For them it was not just about Camille. It was about years of humiliation folded into a single night of reckoning. Kerr's face flushed, his mustache twitching as he tried to puff his chest again. "It was never meant to harm," he muttered, his words frail, drowned by the roar outside. Nash broke down first. His lips moved in stammered apologies, his body restless with shame. "I was joking, just a joke." But Trent cut him cold. "That's evidence." The line landed like iron, final and unbending. Kemp tried to steady his voice, muttering, "People don't understand the split-second choices we make." Camille raised her head at that, her eyes cutting through his excuse. 37 minutes, she said, her tone clinical, devastating, documented. The number silenced the room. 37 minutes of humiliation, 37 minutes of taunts, 37 minutes, too long to ever call instinct. Outside, the crowd surged louder, the chants spilling into the streets. Reporters turned from questions to declarations. Federal probe underway, systemic misconduct exposed. Their words traveled faster than the storm that had begun this night. Trent did not need to shout. He folded the files, turned to the agents, and said, "Bag their devices. Suspend them immediately. Begin full review of every incident connected to their names." The sound of plastic evidence bags tearing open, radios being confiscated, and guns being removed from holsters filled the air like the clatter of chains breaking. Kerr looked at his empty hands, at the badge that no longer shielded him. Kemp sagged into a chair, his arrogance gone, replaced by the weight of disgrace. Nash buried his face in his palms, his youth not softening the fury now directed at him. Camille remained seated, her presence still and immovable. She had not raised her voice, not begged, not fought, she had endured. She had let their own arrogance build the case against them. And now, as the federal agents moved in perfect rhythm, as the crowd shouted in unison, as the flashbulbs burned images into memory, it was clear the silence of one woman had shattered the noise of an entire system. The lobby reverberated with chants, with camera clicks, with the sound of justice clawing its way through stone walls. Camille lifted her eyes to the glass where neighbors and strangers alike stared back, their faces pressed with urgency and relief. She gave them nothing more than a steady look, a look that said, "Remember this, hold it, don't let them bury it." And though her lips did not move, her silence spoke louder than any speech. For the officers, the show had turned against them. For the community, the night was just beginning to open into history. The precinct no longer felt like a place of authority, but like a courtroom exposed under the glare of its own fluorescent lights. What had begun with spilled groceries on wet concrete had grown into something far larger, something that neither Mason Kerr, Howard Kemp, nor Tyler Nash could contain. Their names were now etched into files, their laughter trapped forever in recordings, their arrogance projected on screens for the world to witness. Camille Vaughn stood where they had once tried to break her, her silence unbroken, her presence stronger than the walls around her. Outside, the crowd swelled beyond the glass, spilling into the street, their chants rolling through the night in unison. Let her go, let her go. Those three words had transformed from whispers into a chorus too loud for power to ignore. Director Samuel Trent raised his hand, and the noise inside hushed, though the echoes outside still thundered. He spoke not with fury, but with calm command. This will not end in this room. This is not one mistake. It is a pattern that ends tonight. His words resonated not just as discipline but as promise. Reporters pushed forward, their microphones aimed like arrows, their questions slicing through the charged air. Suspension or arrest? One demanded. How deep does this go? Another pressed. Trent did not flinch. Investigations will be full, thorough, and public. Transparency is no longer optional. Accountability is immediate. Kerr opened his mouth, desperate to salvage dignity, but his words stumbled. We were protecting the neighborhood, following instinct, keeping order. The excuse collapsed under its own weight. Neighbors pressed against the glass, shook their heads, their disbelief visible even through rain-specked panes. Miss Agnes Carter stamped her cane against the floor again, her frail voice sharper than any badge. No more lies. She belongs. We all knew it. Daniel Foster stood tall beside her, nodding, his keys still clenched in his fist as if they were his own badge of courage. The crowd behind them roared their approval, the walls trembling with every cheer. Inside, Nash hunched forward, muttering apologies that went unheard beneath the tide of noise. Kemp leaned against the wall, sweat dripping down his temple, his once booming laugh now replaced with silence that betrayed fear. Kerr looked down at his hands, no longer certain, no longer commanding, stripped of the power he thought permanent. They had wanted to stage a humiliation. Instead, they had staged their own downfall. Camille did not move. She did not speak. She simply let the weight of the moment settle. The silence she carried became the anchor, the unshakable center of a storm that had broken an entire illusion of authority. Her stillness was no longer defense. It was victory. Weeks later, the echo of that night had not faded. The city council chamber overflowed, wooden benches creaking beneath the weight of residents, victims, reporters, and activists. Cameras rolled live as council members shuffled papers, their faces grave, Ordinance 212 was introduced, the Police Oversight and Accountability Act. It demanded body cameras on every officer, independent review boards for misconduct, and public access to disciplinary records. These were not just words on paper, they were the echoes of 37 minutes of silence, transformed into law. A councilwoman rose, her voice steady but sharp. This is not politics, this is survival. 17 indictments are pending, 47 cases tied to this pattern. Tonight, we must decide whether we protect the badge or the people. Applause cracked through the chamber, loud, defiant, unrestrained. Camille sat near the back, plain suit, hair tied neat, her presence quiet. She had not come for recognition. She had come to ensure the silence she once wielded was not buried by bureaucracy. Daniel Foster testified with trembling hands, his voice cracking but resolute. They told me my word meant nothing. They told me to shut up, but that night my word counted, and tonight it must keep counting. Mrs. Carter followed, leaning on her cane, her frail body steady with conviction. I am old enough to know when silence is betrayal. I will not see silence win again. Her words earned a standing ovation, the chamber filled with clapping, shouting, voices united. Beyond the council chamber, murals appeared on brick walls across the city, Camille's silhouette painted against storm clouds. The words beneath, truth doesn't need. For families who once whispered about their children being mocked, about neighbors humiliated, those murals were not art but survival. They were proof that what had been hidden in shadows now lived in daylight. Months later, when Camille was honored at a community ceremony, she did not smile for cameras or bask in applause. Director Trent handed her a plaque etched with 6 words: calm, proof, justice, reform, truth, change. She bowed her head briefly, then lifted her eyes to the crowd. It was never about me, she said quietly. It was about the pattern, about ending it. Her voice, restrained but unwavering, carried through the room and beyond. Outside, the chants of residents still echoed, voices refusing to be silenced again. Kerr, Kemp, and Nash no longer patrolled streets. Their names existed only in court filings, in news reports, in cautionary stories, whispered across neighborhoods. They had wanted her silence to mean surrender. Instead, it became the sound that shattered them. Camille Vaughn walked out of the hall that night with no cameras following, no lights chasing. Her silence remained, her steps unhurried, but the weight of her presence lingered in every corner she left behind. For the community, it was not the end of a story but the beginning of a new one. The question passed through households, diners, classrooms, whispered late at night but carrying the weight of urgency. What would you do if humiliation stood at your door? Would you stay silent, or would you let silence speak louder than power? If this story moved you, don't just watch, stand with it. Like this video so more voices can be heard, share it so silence is never mistaken for weakness, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth hidden in plain sight. And I want to hear from you. If you were standing in that courtyard, would you have stayed silent or spoken up? Tell me in the comments, because your answer might be louder than you think.